Welcome everyone to our second session of the Social Movement Investing Study Group. Great to have you all here. We're going to just record sort of this welcome portion, and we're going to be spending time in breakouts. We'll go into one shortly to just kind of connect a little bit. We'll come back and get a bit of an overview of the section we're exploring today, which is I don't know if it's technically chapter one, but sort of section one on, remind myself here, differentiation, social movement alignment. So, and then we'll have a little bit of a Q&A and go into some small groups to talk about things more. And let's see, closing thoughts from the host, invitations to dig deeper. I don't know. I've got an agenda here. We'll figure it out as we go. Yeah, what else to say? Just by way of welcome, and some of you are coming back, some of you are here for the first time. You know, we've got people coming at this from a lot of different perspectives and angles, and we're going to do our best to try to have the session be, you know, relevant to each of you, given what your needs and interests are. So that's a bit of a challenge that we need your support in. Part of which could be, you know, to think about maybe as part of this little connecting conversation, what is most important to you in your participation in the study group overall, as well as in today's session. Maybe we can hear a little bit of that when we come back out. So welcome Gabriella and Nate just arriving. Yeah, well, Bill is saying you can only be here for the first half hour, which is fine. Welcome back, everyone. And our group got a little larger. Welcome, Kara. Before we're going to pass it over to you, Ariel, to do kind of an overview of this section. Do we want to hear just quickly from a couple of people if there's something, you know, that's specifically calling to them today before you go, or wait? Do you have a preference, Ariel, on that? No?
If anybody has anything burning, happy to hear it. And otherwise, I can jump in. I'm seeing nods, jumping in. All right. Right. So we had a little exchange with some of the facilitation team a couple over the last week, and people were really yearning for more concrete. So I didn't, can you unspotlight me? Sorry, I really don't like looking at myself when I'm talking. So it's more distracting than helpful. Folks can spotlight me on your own if you really want that view. So anyway, folks really wanted more concrete. So last time I started with a very big picture, high level. This time I thought I'd start with some much more detailed, like how to. So this is a presentation that's more for an investor context. And I know a lot of the folks in this group aren't fully on the movement side and aren't fully on the investor side. They're more in the intermediary side, or maybe in trying to use this strategy to fundraise resources for movement context, but hopeful that people can sort of take this as a starting point for jumping off into whatever context. So quickly, I'll do a few slides that go more into some of the overview, and then for section one. So this is how we've been talking. See, when I was at CED, and this is how we were talking with investment side folks about how to actually engage with social movement investing. Start. Do you have all the ability to move all of your investments to community control and governance right now? Yes. Do you have relationships with movement groups you could take direction from about your investment strategies? Yes. Talk with partners about current targets and strategies. Which social movement investing strategies can you use to support movement groups? And then you engage in your support, fight the bad strategies, and you build the new strategies, and it's all magically transformed in our shorthand, right? So that's the path of least resistance, the ideal, but obviously most of us are up here in these with the no path, right? So most people, whether we're individuals with our money in retirement funds or institutions, or we're fundraising money within the nonprofit industrial complex, don't have the ability to move all of our investments to community control and governance right now. So then we want to think about what conditions can we change so that we can shift investments. And we want to build with communities so that we're not doing that out of our own heads, so that we're truly doing that in alignment with community members. And if we can't, as we're working to shift the physical capital or the theoretical capital, then we can also think about other ways to leverage power. So a lot of these pieces are all within section 1. So we start out with, if we don't have the ability to shift all of our resources to community governance right away, there's a couple of different lines of inquiry, and the next 4 slides are pretty text heavy, so I'm just going to cover the headline because we only have 10 minutes for this overview section, but I'm happy to circle back to any of the slides in the Q&A if it's helpful. So the first piece is, where is your money currently invested? Right? Like, a lot of folks don't even know that. Foundations don't know where their money is invested. Individuals who have retirement portfolios don't know where their money is invested. They're invested in products that are mutual funds that have, investments in a huge number of different businesses. So it's really messy and opaque. So one of the places that we encourage people to start is actually just even understanding what they own. And then figuring out who makes decisions about where and how money is invested. In a lot of places, it might be that you yourself are making every decision about your investments, but that's pretty unusual. Most people have a retirement account and they've said what their risk portfolio is, and the retirement account is making the decisions, or they have an investment advisor that's making all the decisions, or they have a board that's, a subcommittee of the board that's deciding how money is allocated. So a second really critical step in understanding how to shift capital is to understand who's making decisions. And then the third piece is to figure out to what extent are people aligned with the idea of shifting capital out of the current extractive system. This spectrum is from the Justice Funders resonance framework, right? From most foundations were founded in the corporate form, and they're fully in this most extractive side of things. Individuals and institutions have the right to endlessly accumulate capital and make decisions on how it should be allocated for the public good. The preservation of wealth and power must be prioritized over the needs of people and the environment, right? So if you have a foundation or a set of individuals who still are in the more extractive framework, most of social movement investing is going to be really challenging to engage in unless you can shift people out of that mindset. And then the fourth piece is to identify, put all of these things together to figure out what you're able to shift and what you aren't able to shift. And it might be that you get to the end of this, hey, all of our investments are tied up in really, long-term investments that are not values aligned. We have an investment advisor who's also not values aligned. And the framework of our board is more extractive. And so the best we can do is some of the sort of leveraging the form of power that we have access to because we have access to capital, but we're not going to be able to actually move any capital. So as we move into the movement alignment section, we're really thinking about, we have to understand what our constraints are. And if we're on the organizing side, we need to understand what the constraints are of the people with capital that we're trying to organize, which is where I hope that this way of thinking through what are people's constraints and opportunities will be supportive regardless of the seat that you're in. So the social movement alignment section really focuses on understanding the intersection of what movements need, who is on movements power maps, who are movements trying to shift, what do movements need access to in order to achieve their goals, and then where does that intersect with the forms of power and capital that we have access to. So there's the two big pieces. I don't have a slide for the 6 forms of reference power, using your influence basically to support movements, even if you don't actually move any money. But we could definitely dig into this piece if it's interesting to folks, like how do you actually structure relationship and accountability between movements and capital holders and intermediaries? what are different forms of that? And honestly, you know, as you see from the paper, there are a few examples of this, but not that many rich and deep examples. We all need to do more work here. And then, you know, also the bringing all of these things together into the movement alignment map, which is about, you know, trying to find the intersections that have the most ability to move us towards just transition based on the conditions and constraints that we're in. So anyway, I hate a very text-heavy slide deck. This was meant to be a workbook that's actually read. So sorry for the disjuncture of like looking at text-heavy slides while I was talking, but I felt like some of the flow of this after the call in for more specific and grounded conversation might be helpful. So I'll stop there, and I'm curious. So I mean, there's like 50 ways we could take this conversation depending on what people are interested in, like which parts of this feel necessary or useful to dig into. But I'm curious first if there are clarifying questions about the reading or anything I just shared, and then we could maybe do breakout groups based on different interests. If there are folks who would rather talk about leveraging power without moving capital, or you know, the forms of capital coordination or any of those things. David.
Thank you very much. Super helpful. Both the reading and those slides actually helped me, right? Because I'm just a more visual learner, so I actually appreciated the slides. My only question is this workbook also available the same way that the report is? The slides and the workbook?
I mean, this is a draft that I made for CED before I left with the intent for the workbook to be completed and distributed and available through CED. So I guess I don't personally feel, I don't want to share this version since it doesn't have like CED's official approval, but there is a goal for a workbook like this to be the next product that CED puts out. Any other questions or thoughts or clarifications?
Raising my hand.
Great, yeah.
I got my hand up.
Comments to you. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I just in my skim of it, I must confess I didn't do a deep reading, but coming from the investment world, having managed pensions for orphans and widows. So I'm trying to. I mean, if this is a digression, we need not go into it deeply, but I'm trying to understand how I can suggest people who are not of means that really have to live off their savings to be able to, to get enough income to live. Because I'm familiar with the impact investment world, and it's characterized by low yield for the most part. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering how you factored that into this advice you're giving people, because I give a lot of pro bono advice to people trying to work out their finances and get out of credit card debt and that sort of thing. But
so the question is, if you're a pension fund manager or if you're an individual, a middle-class individual.
If you're a middle-class individual or a lower-class individual, and you're in a phase of life where you are trying, your income is mainly from your investments. And
in my experience, middle-class people do not have income that's primarily from investments, right? Like that's the definition of being working or middle class in our country, is that you don't have access to enough capital to generate money that you don't have to work for, right? So most people who are working class have to work for every dollar. They don't have investments unless they have a home that they own that's accumulating value beyond, right?
So I'm specifically asking for the rentier class that is living off their investments.
Yeah.
And so what are the options for them to move away from extractive investments to ones that actually provide investment income that can, they can use for their for the income they need to live.
Yep.
So I'm wondering if you have any ideas for that, because it just seems quite, I mean, I'm not saying, it's a good idea, but okay, what do we do? How do we do this?
So there's I feel like amongst the people that I know who are working, especially in like nonprofit intermediaries or who are program staff at foundations, there's a lot of folks who are really aligned with this, and they're like, yeah, I can see how we want it. The foundation has way more money than it could ever want or need. The individual wealth holder that has accumulated a massive amount of wealth has way more than they could need. So they can engage in these strategies without it impacting their day-to-day. But for those of us who have modest savings, most of which are retirement savings, there's like a big question about how we can engage in more aligned investing with our resources. And I don't think anybody solved it. I think basically, I mean, I can tell you that for myself, I don't see a way to participate in the like best practices of retirement savings and fully live social movement investing values. My husband and I have decided to basically portion out our money and have some that's deeply values aligned and some that's a hedge in the current system, because we recognize that we are trapped in the current system just like everyone else. I know other people who are taking, making different decisions about the ways that they're allocating their resources. My husband and I have also talked at length about whether we want to be invested in the stock market at all and what other alternatives are, like land or other investments. None of those are fully values aligned if you play it out to the furthest horizons, right? We were talking last week about abolishing land ownership, but so it's all about recognizing that the current system is completely overwhelming and that we're all trapped in it. What are the ways that we can be as aligned as possible without totally undercutting our chances of survival? And I think that the social movement investing paper and the strategies that are put here are more aimed at people who have an overabundance of wealth, where they can begin to engage in these strategies without impacting their core finances and their survival. And that conversation about middle class survival is one that I'm actively engaged in, that I think a lot of people are trying to figure out.
Got it.
Gabriella?
Great. Thanks. That's really useful. Thank you. And so you
Wait, sorry, can I can I go to Gabriella?
Oh.
So
Thanks.
I think on the other end of it is some of us who are willing to walk away from everything because we don't see we don't see this ending well, right? And just coming from other places and other experiences. And so like I'm trying to figure out how to give my house into a trust, right? And then to leverage the equity from this house to buy other land that would be in a trust and have it set up so that it feeds other people. And so that it does become its own regenerative strategy that doesn't leave anybody hurting, but everybody in a better place. And so like, ultimately, like in my head, I don't quite know the pathway there, but in my head, I know there's a way to access resources, leverage resources and connections to access more land, to save more land for the sake of the environment, that also allows people to live affordably. Right. So like in my mind, these strategies are almost easier to step into because I don't have anything to lose. Right. Like what am I going to lose? You know? And so I think that these strategies are more accessible for the ends of the pendulum, right? If it's a bell curve, I think it's riskier in the middle, because like you said, you're having to hedge your bets on both, you're kind of straddling both worlds in order to maintain some sense of security, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of the ability to build equity and to accumulate wealth off of land, or to accumulate wealth that we share with other people out of land ownership, like all of these are inherently capitalist, right? Versus like an idea where we all share, we communally own land and we use the land, but nobody is extracting wealth.
Right.
So, but I feel like, right.
But that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that I would own it.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I mean, I feel like there's a spectrum of experimentation with a lot of different possibilities, and I feel like this group has people who are at a lot of different points on the spectrum. So I'm curious what the conversation we have that will make sense for, or like what's the interesting conversation that we can have that is supportive of different people using this information in their context.
Yeah, I feel like if we can think of like networks that we're connected to by one or two steps that could use these processes and how we might be able to share them and like share this report and that kind of thing and get the ideas out there to people is one thing I can think of.
Cool. So we have a proposal for a group that's about sort of propagation of these ideas. Any other proposals for groups that folks would really like to engage in, or sub conversations? Yeah.
I'm that. So there's a foundation where Gabriella and I live, and Bill Graustein started it quite a number of years ago, and he's developed a lot of community leadership programs that are specifically designed to empower frontlines people, and it's primarily his money, or his foundation's money involved in that. So he's ahead of the curve in terms of social movement investing himself, but in terms of it being a fund that then attracts other players into that. I'm looking to have a conversation with him after this class series about how the CED paper and this class can work with him to expand the capacity, expand his capacity. And so it's not just his foundation, but it's more players who are interested in, who are involved in kind of a, just enlarging the scope.
The web.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, cool. So that, does that feel like it builds on Kara's?
Yeah, it does to me. It does to me. Yeah.
Expanding the web of people who have access to these ideas and could be expanding the web, as Gabriella says. Thomas, you had a.
Yeah, this may be a framing that is, not appropriate for this group, but I sort of come from a capitalist perspective, and I'm a big advocate of the mixed economy and making the transition to less extractive means. So I'm suggesting, what interests me is developing a risk perspective for doing things like what Gabriella is doing, which is, taking the equity out of her home and then, investing that in the community from a, from kind of a perspective of, recognizing the threats and the discontinuities of our present era, and looking at us from a risk perspective, and being able to manage these discontinuities that are going to just increase as things break down. And it's one thing I was looking for, having a finance background. I'm always looking at it from the perspective of risk, and managing risk in a time when it's just so there's so much discontinuity. How do we do that, and how do we do it in such a way that brings us together in communities where we can actually help each other? And I think might be a useful framing in terms of providing really good advice and guidance to a number of people all along the spectrum of income and assets.
Cool. Ben,
So,
do you have a?
That's
So could we call that one managing risk within capitalism?
No, I think it's managing risk as during a period of discontinuity.
We'll just call it managing risk for now. I'd love to.
And I actually don't even like. I think there's so much hubris in risk management that I sort of don't even like that framing, because
I'll put a
Maybe-
question. It's just a label for the breakout.
yeah,
Maybe
exactly.
transition, it sounds almost like a transition strategies, right?
But
It sounds
I'm
like
just
you're
trying to
talking
form
about.
breakouts now. So
Yeah.
we don't have to get the verbiage is perfect. We just have to know where we want to go. So
Good idea.
for purposes of this group, I'm sorry to interrupt, Gabrielle. I'm hoping to move us into the breakouts. So we've got spreading these ideas. We've got managing risk. I was going to suggest engaging foundations as another conversation, given that I think you're identifying that of all the groups that have money to allocate right now, they're among the ones that might be most capable of doing full-on social movement investing, and potentially values aligned with it, versus billionaires, let's say, who think they deserve the money they have. So
Well, and I know that I could feel like that could be the spreading the idea. I guess I'm curious. I feel like David, last week you said you were interested in actually engaging with this from the fundraising side and moving money on the other side. So I'm curious if that's of interest to people in terms of a conversation about.
Well, thanks for soliciting my my input, Ariel. To my ear, I was thinking, okay, well, I can just go into the spreading these ideas because, you know, to be completely transparent, I'm already got a couple of folks of some level of wealth, people who are at least able to invest. They may not all be accredited investors, but they're interested in this, right? And so I'm imagining in my local community, they're very excited about Nishkama. And so I'm imagining bringing them together and saying, okay, I want to walk you through these things that I'm learning. So I'm happy to say, well, we can either, as somebody like me, who is in the language that I use, a community steward, engaging with people of wealth to entice them. If we want to do something that's granular, or I can roll into the other group about just disseminating ideas, whatever is helpful.
Sounds great. All right, well, 3 groups is probably better than 4. So if that is good for people, then let's do the 3 that Ben suggested.
Okay, I'll set it up so you can move yourself where you want to go, and I'll start with whoever has named these. So I'll do, I'm sorry, the spreading these ideas was Gabriella?
I think it was Cara with the network.
Oh, it was Cara, I'm sorry, right. And Tom with managing risk ? And yeah, and I would like to specifically talk about foundations because we actually have a plan to engage some of the major ones as part of the Blueprint project.
There's some overlap there, Ben, you know, helping foundations understand how to manage risk.
Great. So we'll go for, just gonna check on the time. You know what, I'm just going to open the rooms without a closing time, and I'll send you a little notice on that, and you'll have a 60-second warning in any case. But let's go ahead. I'm going to open the rooms and I'll support people in finding their way. But you should be able to see breakouts and choose one. I'll stop the recording. Welcome back. Don't think we want to get full report outs. I'm sorry, I forgot to put the link to the notes doc in. I hope that maybe we're able to take some notes somewhere that we can dump into our main notes doc for these calls. But let's just hear some, you know, are there any particular insights or conclusions or questions that emerged in your conversations that you want to share with the full group? Leslie.
Our group is the kind of the show me group where we're talking about ways to ground the work in regions, and that we want places for the pioneers who are building regenerative regional resilience to meet and brainstorm and learn from each other and support each other in moving forward with practical implementation on the ground, which also spreads the word. It's like people don't know where to start, really. And so identifying case studies that are working, and I shared some that I knew of that they didn't know, and they shared some that I didn't know, and that it just feels really heartwarming and supportive and encouraging and mobilizing to have this kind of connection. So thank you, Ariel. I want to say right now for your part in bringing this paper to life and bringing us together, and to the team that's hosting us. Check. Is there anybody else from my group that wants to add to that?
I don't see where David went. I mean, who were we with? Tom, yes.
Might have lost Tom, yeah.
Had to go for a meeting, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, so his add-on to that, I think, would be identifying people for those conversations. that Leslie mentioned. People, groups, living examples of parts of it that are moving forwards already. And I want to just add that the work that Ben and Ariel and I are doing on listening and mapping could really play a very valuable role in facilitating what you described, Leslie.
Madeline.
Well, we had a great group. I'm just going to jump to the practical question. Ariel, has anybody ever talked about making this an audio version? And could we do that ourselves? Like just engineer this reading of it? Because I just hear from more and more people like, oh, I want to listen to this book or that book. What do you think of that idea?
Yeah, I mean, CED is hiring a director of capital strategies to steward the work related to social movement investing, and that work, the hiring is happening like right now. So I think that there are lots of plans. When I was there, we weren't talking about audio recording, but I think it's a great idea, and I think the time to pitch that to CED will be in like 3 months, not right now. But I love that idea.
I think one thing that stood out for me in our group was, that my suggestion that foundations are in some ways the lowest hanging fruit, the most accessible source for full-on social movement investing implementation is not true. It's wealthy individuals that don't have all those layers of bureaucracy and complications to deal with and legal constraints. That foundations have all of these different factors, including just a basic unwillingness to even make much in the way of concessionary returns in most cases, let alone consider flat out sunsetting and spending down, which is, I think, what a full application of this would really point them towards, I would say. I mean, then you could do the combination of grants and forgivable loans and low interest investments, and maybe a few investments that make some good returns and stack the whole thing, like David, who's got his hand up, I think is exploring in Humboldt with Tishkema. So I'll turn it over to you, David.
Well, thank you, Ben. You sort of teed me up because I think that's right. Like, and again, I'm learning this language. I was describing to my group the concept of concessionary investments, but I didn't have the language yet. So I'm learning this language, but I speak it with a really heavy accent, right? I speak it with a community organizer / leftist accent, but so I'm anti-capitalism, I'm not anti-capital. And I do think that my experience is you're correct, Ben, that people of wealth, individuals are the lowest hanging fruit, but they also are almost always either running donor advised funds or involved in community foundations as well. So bringing them together. And that's why, Ariel, like when we talked about disseminating this, I'll just name, like in my head, it's like, oh, well, maybe could I get with Ariel and, either raise some money to hire you to facilitate or to train me to facilitate, you know what I mean? Because I feel like I could bring together a group of 6 to 10 that could say, look, I'm not saying you have to invest it, but you have to be able to at least invest $20,000, in this kind of stuff, like some level, not an accredited investor, but some level of I'm in the world of being able to make investments. I want to help you think through what is money and what is investments and so forth. So it's a very long way of saying either you, Ariel, or somebody to help me, because I can't lead this. I can lead stuff on anti-racism. I can lead stuff on patriarchy. I got that down. This I don't have, and I'm a blind dog in a meat locker, right? All to say that. The other thing, Ariel, is at some point, I think that you or somebody should come to the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network board meeting and do a quick and easy, like help folks. And then thirdly, oh my God, Ariel, we got to get you more integrated into the resist and build process with this. So those are the 3 things that I shared in our group that I wanted to put on the table. Pass.
Cool. Can I just respond quickly to one thing that builds on both of what you and Ben said, which is that, so for one thing, I'm a co-author on this paper, but I did leave CED, and I feel like I'm very clear that this is CED's core work. And so I want to be, I left in good terms, and I want to be just like in relationship with CED on, and making sure that they're leading and affirming whatever's happening. But also, so three things. One is, these conversations are happening in a lot of places where wealthy people are getting organized already, like Tonic, like Solidaire Network, like Resource Generation, like Kate and Tiffany's Cordata cohort. I'm working with Neighborhood Funders Group to host a learning group for foundation presidents right now. So I think there's like a path in that way. And I think the other path we've experimented with is the one that's hyper local. So one of the things I was hosting in Boston was the Solidarity Philanthropy Learning Circle. So to me, if you just want your rich people to get educated, you should send them to Solidaire. And like there are groups that are already resourced in doing this. But if you have folks that are in Humboldt County that you want to bring together in a learning circle that's really place-based, that to me is the place to do the intervention that's led by you and an expert and community leaders coming together. And separately, David, I'd be happy to talk to you about the Solidarity Philanthropy Learning Circle experiment we did in Boston, which was basically that version, right? And how to support something like that. But yeah, because what I was thinking about, Ben, as you were talking, is like it's a rare person who comes from a super capitalist family or made a lot of money in the markets that then has like a total conversion and is fully values aligned. But like Resource Generation, which has all these inheritors, and Tonic and Solidaire, and these places where people are already finding each other and convening, are a great starting point to connect with folks who are already values aligned, and then ripple outwards from there, right? Yeah, Connecticut, Heron Foundation, like Donna Daniels has been in this conversation at Heron, could be a really cool anchor for a Connecticut specific conversation about how to shift the social movement investing in that region, right? I think that for me, those conversations need to be bigger. Like we started with resonance framework, you have to actually do the values alignment piece first. And then the context grounding commitment to place, and then you shift to, okay, what are we actually going to do? And here's some strategies, So if it's a layered intervention, if it's really about building an intersectional network of people, some of whom have access to a lot of resources, who are going to support building a solidarity economy in place.
Kara's asking about groups in the UK or Europe, Ariel.
I don't know. I did hear from people on LinkedIn that people in the UK were super psyched about the solidarity or the SMI paper. Like we got that feedback when we first put it out, but I don't know. I don't know who was over there like being excited about it. So not that I know of, but Resource Generation is maybe what you're thinking about, which is the organizing group for young people with wealth. They probably know if there is something similar in Europe, but I'm not aware of anything.
And what would be a good way to get connected with a group like that, Resource Generation? Like, do they have conferences that other foundations and such can go to? Or?
Well, Resource Generation is specifically for people 18 to 35 who have inherited wealth.
Oh, okay.
So they have conferences for people who are that profile.
Okay.
But then Resource Generation shows up to lots of, for
Speakers.
example, one of the groups I was part of was called the Just Transition Funder Organizing Ecosystem, and Resource Generation had a presence there, and that's like a place where a lot of us were exchanging ideas about, how are we shifting the field? And like, how are we exchanging ideas across these groups and sharing content with one another? Justice funders might be a great place to look too. They have a lot of resources, and they're holding a foundation group about this also that they just launched.
And I'll just thank you, Ariel. I do want to just jump in and just let folks know that so far, justice funders are fantastic. They have been clear with us that they're starting with the foundations and are so they're not in a position, I don't think, to convene like, individuals yet. But maybe you know more, Ariel. Maybe that shifted. But when Leslie and I were doing some work with them, that was the message. And Leslie, unless you feel like I misheard or misunderstood that.
Well, I think they do have people who are individual investors also who are part of the funders network, but I'd say it's mostly foundations. I think it's a blend. And this may be a good opportunity to, shout out to Justice Funders also as a partner in the community-driven Integral Capital Workshop series that David and I are co-hosting with Justice Funders. There's a non-extractive financing workshop that East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative is hosting this summer. Happy to link to the information about this series in our notes, because there's one more workshop in that series, and we're curious about where we go next. And this study group is part of the listening for what are we looking for. And
can you say the names of those things again? Permanent.
So I was talking about case studies that are doing regenerative finance. It's a long name. It's East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, or EB-PREC. I'll put a link in the notes. It's actually in the workshop. They're a collaboratory partner that's been, thank you, Ben, that has been doing cooperative forms of, I think they're doing different new legal forms. They're doing land trusts, but they're using new forms of finance. I don't even understand what they are, to try to raise millions of dollars to buy commercial districts and real estate property to take it off the speculative market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to laser focus on that at some point, because that's definitely in line with what I think we're trying to do here, Nate, right? Does that sound right?
Yes.
So we need more examples of who to look for, right? To learn with and from as we're all on the journey together. And Dishkema Humboldt, that's another great example that was featured in one of the workshops. We actually were framing it around the 3 big steps to community-driven integrated capital, which is creating a community plan, creating a capital plan, and generating non-extractive finance.
We have a video of that workshop too, or a couple
There's
of videos.
videos of everything so far, right? I'll put a link in the chat right now if I can take a second to do that.
I was inspired by all these tactics. Like, it was a lot more than just buying land. It was also like connecting all these stakeholders to make it bigger and get that voice out. And, yeah, I don't know. It's a random thought, I guess.
Inspiration is always good to hear.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things we wanted to do in these calls was see, we know we can only kind of scratch the surface and operate at a fairly general level in these 5 weeks. But if we can identify some particular areas where people actually want to roll up their sleeves and do some ongoing work, that's something we want to name and harvest and see if we can energize as a next step potentially, or maybe pair up with the justice funders or resource generation, et cetera, where we do have some contacts as well. And at least connect people, or maybe there's some way that we're bringing something to the table that's complementary. So if there's anything people want to name as, I'd really like to pursue X further and go deeper on that, please do so. And you can do it in the notes doc too. There's a space for post-call reflections if something comes to you in the dream time or as you're taking a walk later, as well as to put some notes in for next week's session. That'll help us, I think, in planning.
Gabriella and I are definitely planning to go ahead with the creation of the land trust or land cooperative, and there have been some enormous resources just from this session. Thank you, Leslie, for the East Bay group, and Ariel for the Heron Foundation, which I just looked into. Amazing. So in terms of a practical thing moving forwards, I think that's something that she and I are going to be really focusing on here. A lot of urgency about it.
Yep, I think we're ready to jump off the cliff on that one. Get our wings.
Yeah, SELC is a great resource that Ariel just put in, the Sustainable Economies Law Center. They really kind of birthed East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. Leslie and I were privileged to kind of watch that happen and help get a little bit of funding their way in those early days through the TRCC. And they do support, they have a lot of resources online. They do these legal cafes as well. So they're based in the San Francisco Bay Area, but they'll support groups around the country. We were hoping Chris Tittle was going to come. He registered for this.
One of the things, there's a Boston group that's working on a movement-owned building. I think I might have mentioned that last time, more of an office space, but one of the things is that SELC was super helpful, and then they were also very clear that real estate is state by state. And one of the things that took us a long time to do is find an aligned real estate lawyer. We did eventually find somebody, but it took way longer than we hoped. So that there's the fundraising and then the legal components of structuring the experiment in a state by state way seems like a sort of general barrier. But for what it's worth, there's a couple different experiments happening in Boston where we might be able to share resources, even if not the exact legal information, given that's state line, arbitrary.
I came off mute to just say, just as there is a group of lawyers who are coming together, Movement General Counsel, the Just Lawyering Institute, this need has been identified. Almost all lawyers, like I'm a lawyer by training, but I was not a transactionalist because most lefty lawyers went into a different type of law. We don't know how to do this, right? So we're having to train up a whole cadre of lawyers to help do the legal work, just like we're having to, frankly, train capital stewards to think differently about money. That's all.
Any other going deeper impulses from people?
One impulse is around the power, like that concept of drawing down power. It's like how when you say, hey, let's distribute the power, a bunch of people are like, F no, go, we're shutting down your program. So just talking about that, what ways are working or ideas.
That's one of the core things about power, right? Sorry, Gabriella.
I was just going to say, just watch the Blue Goo video, because that's just sort of explains everything.
Okay, you said that last time too, so it sounds like I better do that. If I YouTube that, will it just happen?
Then
the pyramid and the pool is what you YouTube, but I'll put it in our notes. It may already be there, but
okay.
I think it's just always an open tab, it seems, on my browser. I'll put it in the chat.
I know, right? It's like I need to watch it every morning to remind myself or something.
Tom's organizing lunch to talk about it on Friday with Steve.
Maybe I could pop into that.
Yeah, if you want to come up to Great Barrington, please.
Yeah, I'd love to. I love it up there, actually. Maybe. Don't tempt me with a good time.
I'm curious in setting up for next week, I mean, the chapter 2 is about the 3 different levers of power, sort of the community ownership, community governance, and community action. And a lot of the chapter is just examples of different parts of the experiment that people are working on. So I guess like curious, we could, in terms of the stewardship group, we could have it be about the theory of the forms of power, or about sharing, like going deeper on what it sounds like your group did, Leslie, and actually sharing examples and how some of these projects shifted since they were written about in the paper, et cetera. So maybe that's something for folks to think about, just even as you're reading, and what part of the conversation you'd like to have next week.
What are the pages for next week?
It's just it's
like number 2, areas for activity.
Yep, 55
okay, 54,
through
60. 54 to 60 is what I have, or maybe there's a blank page.
We're getting into the shorter sections now.
Yeah, that was long. I was like, I'll just read this over my lunch hour. Then I was like, dinner time.
Any other closing comments for us, Ariel? Reflections from a co-author's perspective as we wrap up?
No, I appreciated that the conversation is the reality of this, which is it's really big and sprawling. There's a lot of entry points. There's a lot of points for where you have to hold a lot of complexity. And I hope everybody got something out of this. And also, as we get deeper into the study together, that people can bring more precise needs and desires and framing to our conversation.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, everyone. And see you next week, I hope.
Thanks, everybody.